Order. 10-minute rule motion. Mr Tom Harris.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to move that leave is given to bring in a bill to amend the Employment Rights Act 1996 to give all parents who have suffered the loss of a child a statutory right to paid leave. Can I begin, Mr Speaker, by thanking members on all sides of the House for their support for this bill, many of whom are present just at the moment. I want to highlight the work, first of all, of Lucy Herd and the Jack's Rainbow campaign that she established after the loss of her 23-month-old son Jack in tragic circumstances in August 2010. After his son's death, Lucy's partner was given just 5 days compassionate leave before having to return to work. Like many members of the House I've spoken to, Lucy was surprised that parents did not already have a legal right to paid leave after the loss of a child, and I want to pay tribute to her for working tirelessly to get paid bereavement leave for grieving parents onto the statute book. Most of us can imagine nothing more distressing than losing a child. Yet at this traumatic juncture in a parent's life, there is no guarantee of paid statutory leave in the event of a child's death. The physical and emotional toll on parents demands such a provision. In the immediate aftermath of a child's passing, bereaved parents must cope not only with their own grief, but also that of their family. Siblings must be comforted, family and friends informed. To add to the burden, a great deal of administrative work and other arrangements must be undertaken. A funeral needs to be organised, schools and benefit offices must be notified. In the case of a sudden or accidental death, a post-mortem or inquest is required. This may take many months to conclude, prolonging the anguish. At present, all employees have the right to take immediate time off for dependents under the Employment Rights Act 1996. This is a legal right to unpaid leave to cope with family emergencies. However, there is no set limit on how many days can be taken, only a vague definition of a reasonable amount of time. Each employer will have their own bereavement policy, which is typically just 3 to 5 days. In response to an e-petition calling for statutory bereavement leave, which has received almost 23,000 signatures, the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills stated that all requests for leave related to bereavement are best left for employers and their employees to decide between themselves. I understand, Mr Speaker, that the amount of leave needed can vary from one individual to another. Some parents will not be able to face going back to work. Others may find that returning to work is a welcome distraction. Grief is not uniform. It affects people in different ways, and each person will need specific time to deal with them. Many employers act admirably and offer significant amounts of paid bereavement leave. Regrettably, however, some do not. There are a large number of cases where employers have fallen far short of their duties. In one case, which was recently televised on an episode of Channel 4's Undercover Boss, a driver for waste disposal company Biffa was forced back to work just 1 day after the loss of his daughter. In another tragic case, a father, a builder, was expected back to work 5 days after he lost his daughter to sudden infant death syndrome. Despite feeling unready to return to work, having barely slept, the man was told to resume work or he would lose his job. On yet another occasion, a parent was given just 3 days off after the death of his 4-year-old son. The funeral was arranged for the 4th day, leading to the man having to use up his paid holiday leave to attend. Mr Speaker, I wish these were isolated events. They are not. I could list many more. In its response to the e-petition, the government stated that it would expect any employer to respond to the loss of a child with sensitivity and flexibility. I find it difficult to believe, given the tragic cases I've just highlighted, that any minister could find any merit in this statement. All grieving parents should be treated with dignity, and I hope the government will acknowledge that under the current system this is not happening. The government has stated it would be difficult to specify statutory bereavement leave entitlement because limits, standards and definitions would need to be put in place. The government has also argued that it would be difficult to define what family relationship would qualify for such leave, and that it would be impossible to legislate for every circumstance. I find this argument disingenuous. What limits, standards and definitions would be too complicated to establish in the case of a parent losing a child? Surely the government should start from the moral case that parents should be afforded time off if their child passes away and not find obscure excuses not to act. Again, I am under no illusions that the amount of time needed varies from one individual to another. But instead of absolving all responsibility and leaving this area to employers, ministers should be working towards guaranteeing best practice. This can only be achieved through legislation. The government has also argued it would be impossible to legislate for every family relationship that would qualify for such leave. Well, how about a simple provision in which only the parents of the deceased child are afforded statutory leave? This is a straightforward, common-sense way to proceed. I fully acknowledge, Mr Speaker, that long-term staff absenteeism can hit productivity, particularly for small companies. But considering parents are given paid maternity and paternity leave, it's difficult to argue why grief-stricken parents are not afforded similar statutory rights. A mother is afforded up to 12 months leave for the birth of a child, but is given just 3 days for her loss. How can this be? On what moral basis can we give precedence to one and not the other? I do not intend this measure to place unaffordable costs or unwanted regulation on employers. In fact, the circumstances that would give rise to such leave are as rare as they are tragic. And as I've said, most employers already choose to recognise the responsibilities to their workers. I know the current economic climate is pushing many businesses to the edge, but that also goes for ordinary families across the country. With the cost of living rising, grieving parents should never be forced to choose between meeting their responsibilities to their families and putting food on the table. Parents who suffer the loss of a child must be allowed to grieve with dignity. This can only be guaranteed by a statutory right to paid bereavement leave, and I commend this bill to the House.
Order. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Stella Creasy, Dr William McRae, Mr Stuart Jackson, Kwasi Kwarteng, Andy Sawford, Mr David Anderson, Ian Stewart, Tracy Crouch, Natasha Engel, Sheila Gilmer, Greg Mulholland and myself, sir.
Mr Tom Harris.
Parental Bereavement Leave Statutory Entitlement Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, October the 18th.
Friday, October the 18th. Thank you. Order.